Hi, my name is Ken Asselson. I wrote Microbiome Prescription website, and this is an advanced introduction to the microbiome. And basically, I'm going to be looking at two features which have been recently refactored and back on the site. So it is a little bit more complicated. You have to do a bit more thinking to make good use of it. But if you are frustrated by not getting traction, you may want to take a look at this approach. So we have the advanced induction, and what we're going to do is it's pretty simple. Introduction, which is just talking about what we have, and then we're going to look at the traditional view of bacteria, in which case one bacterium is the issue, and there are a bunch of diseases like that. Often people will say, oh, well, since that's the case for these diseases, it must be the case for this disease. For example, this must be the case for IBS. It must be one bacteria, or it must be one bacteria for Crohn's, or must be one bacteria for Parkinson's, or etc. Doesn't hold true, and it's something to understand is you cannot assume because some things are single bacteria that everything is single bacteria. Next step, we go in and we could look at chemical imbalances caused by bacteria. Bacteria produces chemicals. If you ever been to a distillery, the alcohol is being produced by bacteria fermenting foods in the vats. Same for beer. So we have chemicals being produced by bacteria. Some of the chemicals may be produced in excess or insufficient. Next, we go on to bacteria enzymes deficiency. That is that a chemical or enzyme which takes part in processing food may not be sufficient to handle all the food coming in. And that means that your food coming in happens to be rich in, let's say, vitamin B12, but you're vitamin B12 deficient. And why? Because the chemical needed, the enzyme needed to extract it from the food is not sufficient to do adequate extraction. Then we do a quick review of consequences of dysbiosis, recap our approach to correcting, and then last but not least is no one has definitive answer. This is my approach, this is my thinking. It's logical, it's rational, and in my humble opinion, if there's no established medical science to deal with a condition effectively, this gives you a reasonable path which will probably help. Keyword: reasonable and probable. Okay, introduction. Well, very simple. Microbiome Prescription is effectively our card catalog. To this, recently I've added in general information, which is often based on ChatGPT. ChatGPT can be useful. If you frame the question well, you have pretty good, accurate answer. However, ChatGPT is known to produce hallucinations on occasion, which means that anything you read, labeled description or info, if you should not rely on being 100% correct. It may give you a hint of something you want to dig into, but it's not guaranteed to be 100% correct. If you find something which has a major issue, please tell me, and I will go and revise the particular description as needed to be more accurate. Bacterial information source is the U.S. National Library of Medicine. You can check this information. Things in description, we don't link to the sources. ChatGPT doesn't provide us with links, and so it is out there with reader beware. Personal and subjective experience is not included by design. Oh, it works for me, definitely must work for you. No, we don't use that logic. Okay, so one bacterium is the issue is very much an old school way of doing, because there are many conditions where there is a single bacteria. Some cases, it's only in the last 30 years that the relationship between something like, for example, ulcers and Helicobacter pylori has been accepted in medicine side. Other things go back much longer. The classic thing is TB, ulcers, typhoid. Shingilla for food poisoning, and there's a bunch of other single bacteria which are connected with food poisoning, whooping cough, gonorrhea, etc. So all those are traceable back to a single bacteria. And since we know which bacteria, then what do? We have a simple treatment. We go in and we find something that kills or inhibits the growth of the bacteria. Bactericidal or bacteriostatic. Static means static. So bacteria won't grow anymore, which in some cases is all you want, because then your body is able to handle what's there. It doesn't have to face ongoing massive increasing of bacteria, where it's not overwhelmed. And there on the left, we have a variety of things. Some are natural, often coming from other bacteria, typically coming from other bacteria, or synthetic, which is something concocted that generally based on natural antibiotic in the lab. And then we have a bunch of different classes. Each of the different classes impacts different aspects of the bacteria. Some cases reproduction, some cases a particular bit of bacteria is latched onto to kill it. So when we have one bacteria involved, very easy to do. Generally, criteria is simple, doesn't cause too much collateral damage. Generally, they will cause collateral damage. They will impact other bacteria. The key is not too much. If the doesn't cause major adverse effect, then generally it's acceptable because it takes care of the single bacterium. Okay, chemical imbalance by bacteria. Here we have to make a step up and a step away from the usual thinking, is that the bacteria produces different chemicals. Many different bacteria may produce the same chemical. And the question is, okay, so we've got 15 bacteria producing the same chemical. Do we have a surplus of this chemical or insufficiency of the chemical? So what we have is we have added, which we'll show later in the demo, is we have K compounds, which are basically these chemicals, and we estimate the relative amount of each and then do it by percentile to see if you are above or below. Generally, these tables work best with two types of data coming from microbiome data coming from BiomeSite in the UK or Ombre in the US. Foreign is partially supported, but we don't really have a high volume of samples there. So it is very, a little bit suspect. We need more samples before that. The other two are good. So if you're wanting to do this approach, use BiomeSite or use Foreign. So use Ombre. Okay, so in this case, the example we're looking at, the person has Crohn's. I added in the search term Crohn's and everything shows up and gives the percentile ranking. And then we go and we see that deficiency vitamin A is associated with it, and the compound connected with vitamin A is a 30 percentile. In other words, the person is low in this particular bacterial product, and hence vitamin A supplementation seems like a reasonable suggestion to proceed with. Now, same person happens to also deal with histamine, and we can go down and we can type in the word histamine and just get the things that high. And this person deals with too much histamine. So when we see something like 80 percentile, they have more histamine produced than most people. And now we can go in and we can take a look at what the components are, and there will be several components not. But from there, we can go over and take a look at which bacteria produces this particular compound. And we can see we have some which are high, and you may want to go and do a targeted reduction of the ones that are high to reduce the amount of this histidine compound which feeds histamine. So it's basically gives you ability to handpick the bacteria that are most concerned. Generally, if you're too high in something, I would look for anything which is 90th percentile and above and handpick them for a customized set of suggestions. If you're too low, anything below 50 percentile, you want to custom pick because you want to increase that. You could actually go above that because you really are to 70 percentile because you want the ones that produces this compound to increase. Okay, now, so compounds, we get a list of the compounds, your relative percentile ranking, and the bacteria involved. And now from the bacteria involved, you can pick the bacteria which you want to change. You want to increase them or decrease them. It gets added to a hand-picked bacteria list, and you can now get suggestions from that. And the suggestions will be added into the consensus. So we now go on to bacteria enzyme deficiency. Basically, enzymes are not necessarily compound produced, but they are helpers for digesting. People who take enzymes to help digest the food will understand the concept. The enzymes aren't the food, but they help break down the food, help get the good stuff out of the food. So enzyme deficiencies are a potential aspect of your health, because if you have a deficient of an enzyme, then some supplements, some other things going into the body may be not enough, or alternatively, you're very high in enzyme, you may be super efficient, and if this enzyme is, for example, connected with obesity, the high rate of this enzyme could be the cause for obesity. This case, again, we're looking at Crohn's, and when we look at it and we find that vitamin B12 deficiency can happen if this enzyme is too low, in which case rational thing to do is go and do vitamin B12 supplement. Remember, the site gives you suggestions for dosages. The dosages on most bottles are non-therapeutic. That is, they are basically maintenance. With Crohn's, you could have a reduced ability to absorb the vitamin. You have reduced enzymes to absorb the vitamin. So the dosages you should be taking daily are likely to be significantly more, maybe even 10 times more than what is suggested on the bottle. Okay, now, here we're looking at the enzymes, and we're looking at histamine, and what we end up doing is want to point out that you may want to carefully read all the information. Often people get one idea that histidine does one thing and one thing only. That's false. It does many things, so you need to go in and proceed to work with it. For example, the person has Crohn's. Is that a byproduct of that is impaired immune function? In this case, this particular one is it has an impact on the ability to handle histidine, and so you've got a possible hiccup there. Okay, now, as before, you can go over and follow through, as you see in the demo, to get the actual bacteria involved, which you have. There's no point in pointing out bacteria you don't have, which aren't in a sample, because how are you going to acquire them? If they're probiotics, you're lucky. Most of them will not be. So we have to work with what we know you have there. We want to encourage ones that are low, and we want to inhibit the ones that are high. So let's go on before going over the samples, the demos. Dysbiosis can be too much or too little of a compound, too much or too little of an enzyme, too much or too little of a bacteria. I tend to favor the compound and enzymes approach, but the compound enzyme approach is much harder to build an expert system on. It's possible, but it is more challenging, to put it mildly. Basically, it would require some heavy funding and hiring a fair number of grad students to take care of the data entry. Compounds and enzyme feeds or starve the body processes. Classic example, insufficient or too much can cause cognitive issues. For example, lactose is known to cause cognitive function. Insufficient too much can influence cancer as it encourages or inhibits it. And there are hundreds of medical conditions associated with dysbiosis. Irritable bowel syndrome, autism, asthma, even ADHD, etc., etc. So we have found a way now. We are almost having to become a parole, a detective, because we have not a simple piece of evidence. You have to look at the other factors, the compounds and the enzymes, to understand what the whole picture is. That is a little bit more complicated, but in my opinion, well worth the effort. Okay, our approach to correcting is same as in the intro. It can be influencing the bacteria. That is what we can do. Things like enzymes and compounds, some cases we can supplement for compounds. Enzymes tend to be pretty difficult. They can be targeted drugs which may inhibit or encourage a particular enzyme, but that starts getting into general prescription drugs, difficulty, and sometimes limited studies on the impact. So if it's something which we can identify as a supplement, then taking it or reducing it if you're already taking it. Herbs and spices, off-label use of drugs. Working off bacteria for some condition has limited success. Can often be the case. Yes, things have improved, but are not back 100%. Often it's because the significant isn't individual bacteria, but combinations of bacteria. And how do we determine a combination? We determine a combination by looking at things that are involved in producing a particular compound, or things involved in producing enzymes. So what we are doing is we're moving on and looking at compound and enzymes produced by the microbiome, a far more holistic approach, a complete picture, not just the bacteria, but also what the bacteria causes or produces. The goal is to give reasonable summary of, in terms of the new feature, of what is there. It is searchable, as you will see in our walkthrough, and the intent is to lead you sense things to explore, to discover more, almost like a bit of evidence for a detective to figure out how does this piece of evidence fit in with everything else. Not a clean cut, oh, there was a Irishman in the neighborhood and somebody smashed the window. It must have been a drunk Irishman tossing a ball through the window. Not that type of evidence. That is biased evidence, and we want to avoid it. We want to work as closely as in, did somebody see it? Do we have fingerprints of the persons on the ball that went through the window, etc., etc.? Do we have video on it? Then we can use all the evidence to say, oh, okay, now it's actually just university student who did it, and we have his fingerprints and we have him video, and we don't know his name, but we know what he's wearing, and it happens to belong to a particular fraternity, so we should be able to reduce it and figure out who the person is. So with that much said, we move on to the demo, and I'll take a look at one person sample, and we'll go through looking at Crohn's and histamine issues, looking at the compounds and the enzymes. So that is what we are about to do. Okay, this is the walkthrough on the site. The best labs to use at the moment are Ombre and BiomeSite. Foreign you can use, but we don't have that high volume of data from foreign to give good percentile estimation, but it is technically possible, and that may change over the next few months. Okay, so we have K compound and K enzyme. Notice the little warning symbols on it. And why do we have it? It's a big database. It's not particularly suited for a just see on a phone or on even a tablet. You probably need a desktop with a good sized screen. So let's first start with compound, and which we go right here, compound. So we have compounds, and this particular person came up with 2,200 compounds are estimated, a good number. So, as you can see, there's a fair amount of data for every single compound. So let's take a look, and we type in Crohn's, since that's the particular case. And if you go to the bottom, we see we have 14 entries dealing with Crohn's. We can just simply upgrade that to 20. And we can now see what does it say about Crohn's, and using good old-fashioned web browser search, we see okay, the nitrate level could be a factor, very low here. I would suspect it may be. And another one with butyrate, again 7%. It's probably the person has low butyrate. Butyrate is anti-inflammatory. Crohn's is an inflammatory condition. We have another one which is there, and dysregulation is impact that. It deals with cell wall integrity. Again, we have a low level. Crohn's tends to have cell wall irregularity. And we have more gut barrier function there, and we can go on. And dysregulation, immune, again low level. So what we actually have for this person with Crohn's, we have two around 50%, and 12 which are low, which would imply that the items that are low are probably significant. And now what do we do? Well, we could go over to the first one, the nitrate, and we just open that in a new window. And there we see it, and there, and you can see here we have limits. And now if as with all the charts, we can do a scaling data. We have the flat line, and the value is below the flat line, which means it's definitely something to be considered. Down at the bottom, we have, unfortunately, far too many bacteria there. In some cases, it's on both sides of the list, and in other cases, it's not. So what we can do is just check down the list. Okay, we have a match there. And we may want another one here. Doesn't seem that there. So these are things which are producers. We want to increase the producers, but at the same time, we want to decrease ones which are high. Let's check there. Okay, what we're doing is checking to make sure we don't have a match of the names. I probably should add a feature which flags names which are unique for one side or unique for the other, and that will probably be there the next day or two. But at the moment, everything there. So we have a whole bunch of bacteria, which we're now going to simply click here, and takes us over to handpick bacteria. We have 10 bacteria selected, which is fine. And now we can go on, and if we want to go on for something else and inspect that one, let's take a look at this one. And we are way down here. Let's do scale data, definitely in the low part. And which bacteria? There's only one there. Actually, I think I probably clicked the wrong one. This is the one I should have clicked. Butyrate answer, we have low there. If you do scale data, again, we see the flat part below there, and now we have a long list of things here. And again, we have some, these are consumers, so we want to reduce some of the consumers, making sure none of them are on the producer list. And then we want to increase some of the producers. Again, we go through and we add, and now we have 13 there. So that is basically, we can now also go over and take a look at histamine. And we have a variety there. All the histamine items are 45% or low. And at this point in time, we need to do a little bit of reading about each one, because it seems that, for example, histidine is a precursor to this one, which means that this particular pathway to that compound isn't happening, which means that histidine is in surplus as a consequence because it's not being processed elsewhere. So again, we can do as we did before. We can go click view, take a look at the list, and we want to decrease the high ones, and we want to increase the low ones, which are unique. There's one which is unique. So we just go and we proceed to add it. So we have 15 bacteria. Now, if you go over to enzymes, we have a bit more information. Generally, enzymes refer to the enzyme numbers, and the official names here, alternative names here, their count. Up at the top, we have a description of what is the reaction as far as known, and down below is more information. These two sections do not come from ChatGPT, but come from a UK site. And there we have a thing. And now let's go in and look for Crohn's again. And how many do we find connected with Crohn's? We have 11. So we have a small number of candidates, which are things to consider. And now let's just do as we did before. Walk through the list and see what it says. And again, it will take some reading sometimes. And we see alterations. We have an alteration towards the low. We have another one. And we have here, we have a warning that it could exacerbate symptoms, and we are dealing with sorbitol metabolism. We can go over here and we see there, and we can scale the data and see. And we have down here the bacteria involved, and we want to increase that, and we can, anything below 50% would be increased, anything over 50% would be decreased. I don't have the ability, I don't have the feature added that of being able to specify which one it is. And give it a second. It's back. Oh, we have 15 there. We may well have done it. So we have a bunch of bacteria selected here. And now we can go and get suggestions from it. Sorry. That was code, which should have been there. And now we have things that should help, particular things like inulin, Holy Ghost, resveratrol, vitamin A, which we did come across in our review, and the microbiome says vitamin A is something that should be there. Bifido animus lactis should be there. Barley often is a proxy for beta glucan, so we have that there, etc. So we have a whole variety of things which should potentially help more than hurt in all probability. Okay, so that is basically there. We also have here, if we click here, it goes all out and gives a summary. Again, this data is coming from ChatGPT. What each of the items selected, general overall health impact is. So you can take a read through and see what helps. For example, it regulates the immune system with Crohn's and with histamine. That is definitely preferably. Number one, another one which moderate the immune. So you get your information background as to what is being suggested actually do, and you can read and read them. Conceptually, this information will hopefully help you or educate you or convince you that the suggestions are probably going to be helpful, rather than going of ad hoc. Oh, I heard that such and such isn't good. Here it describes the aspect. Remember, we are dealing with a multi-dimensional problem. You cannot just go on a single piece of information. You need to examine a large number of pieces of information. Okay, so that is sort of a quick walkthrough. It's time consuming and it may challenge you. Key thing is type in the word, look only whatever keywords impact you, and then go in and see what it says about it and understand what you can. Don't worry if you can't understand everything, but see if you can understand what's going on better. If you're happy with what it is, I think it's probably appropriate. You can go over to the bacteria, pick the bacteria, add the bacteria in, and then get suggestions based on the bacteria which you have selected. Now, just a FYI, the cake and the compound all works on the species level. The actual source of the data is at the strain, but I aggregate the strain data up to the species because most of the time species is all you will get reported. And shotguns such as Cosmos ID, Foreign, etc. will give a much better coverage of species and more accurate coverage of species than Biomsite or Ombre. But we simply are working with what we have available as data. And we're doing the best which we can with limited data. So this basically ends the demo, and just a recap, no one has definitive answers. By training, I'm a statistician, accustomed to probability, so all I do is work on odds and try doing things to optimize or make the favorable odds as high as I can, knowing that it may not be. There's nothing guaranteed. So just give me suggestion, which is done by bacteria only. We take the data together using a Monte Carlo model. Additional approach suggested is to pick your bacteria by compound, by enzymes, and you go and you aggregate it all together and add it to the consensus, which will help give a better result. Ideally, with the consensus, if you have done 5 different ways of getting consensus, you want the one where everybody agrees with. That is your highest probability. Some cases, when you go through the compound list or the enzyme list, you will see particular supplements which are available being referenced or inferred, in which case some of those things are likely good for you to do. Example, we saw vitamin A, an enzyme which is connected to, or a compound connected to vitamin A. It was a very low percentile. The suggestions came up with vitamin A as a supplement, in which case, guess what? It matches, it balances. So that is basically it. And so I think we've already done a demo. So just a quick thank you. Drop me a line if you have a question. I'll try to answer it. I do not do individual walkthrough analysis. It's very time consuming. What I'm trying to do is build tools so that you or your knowledgeable MD or your medical practitioner, naturopath, or whatever is able to work with it, get data accurately, quickly, and be able to work with things by having data all available at one spot. My so-called card catalog model, all data is there, and now you just have to work with it and see what you can come up with. Logical and reasonably accurate. Keyword: anything which is read a description comes probably, or you should assume, comes from ChatGPT. Not always true, but most of the time it is. So before you trust that, you probably need to go over to PubMed and do your own research, ideally. However, you may find that finding the research can be challenging. So I'm just citing that as the preferred practice. It depends on your skill level and your ability to digest information. Generally, don't get too worried about those long, awkward, nasty enzyme for compound names. That is in passing. You can call a rose, or you can give it a very long Hindu name. It's still a rose. It's just something, and what you want to do is, it's a fragrant smell from it and the color which is of interest, not the actual name. Same thing with the microbiome. It's the consequences that are interest, not the very challenging name to pronounce or to understand, and forget about trying to spell it. Okay, that's it.